keeping kids out of juvenile detention.
Locking kids in detention is not an effective intervention.
And years after Major League Baseball left Tucson, one former hub of spring training is thriving.
Now it's kind of taken off the past couple of years.
This is Metro Week. Hi, I'm Vanessa Barchfield. Thanks for joining us. This week, resource for kids who are in trouble. And we'll also check in on conservation efforts along the Santa Cruz River. That and much more after a look at the week's top stories from the Arizona Public Media Newsroom.
Senator John McCain says he will not vote for the Graham-Cassidy health care reform bill. McCain issued a statement today saying he might support similar legislation if it were, quote, the product of extensive hearings, debate, and amendment. McCain's announcement may spell the end of the Republican-led efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare. McCain said he thinks a better bill can be written if both Republicans and Democrats are involved. In July, he took to the floor of the Senate and chastised members for pushing Obamacare repeal legislation through without committee hearings. Tucson's Cactus for Amazon is staying home. Amazon tweeted this week that it cannot accept gifts in the bidding process for its headquarters. Last week, Southern Arizona's economic development group, Sun Corridor, announced it intended to send Amazon a 21-foot-tall saguaro cactus in advance of the region's official bid to land the facility. More than 100 cities and counties are bidding for the project that Amazon says will eventually employ 50,000 people. In its tweet, Amazon said the cactus is, quote, really cool, and it's donating it to the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. The value of trade heading in and out of Arizona went down slightly last year, according to U.S. Census data. More than $22 billion in goods left Arizona for foreign countries last year. That's a drop of about 3% from 2015. For more on all of the week's stories, you can always visit our website.
Pima County opened its Alternative Community Engagement Services, or ACES Center, just over a year ago. It's a spot for kids who've brushed with the law to find out about options and get some respite. We visited this week to find out exactly what they're doing and how it's going.
Here at the ACES Center, we serve youth that are 8 years all up to their 18th birthday who have been referred to the court for status offenses, which are offenses that would not be offenses if not for their age, like runaway juvenile or curfew. Also, misdemeanor domestic violence offenders. So we're looking at domestic violence offenses that do not involve things like weapons or injuries. And also we serve a population of kids that we consider to be voluntary. Their parents are looking for services for them. Maybe they haven't been referred to the justice system yet, but they are in need of services. They're having behaviors that are similar to other children in the system.
So we're in the ACES Center. This is our front entrance. This is a renovated detention pod, so we've really tried to modify it, make it a much more engaging place for families to be able to enter. This is a 24/7 operation, so families or kids could walk in at any time and get services. Also, our law enforcement brings our misdemeanor domestic violence referrals here for our youth.
On average, law enforcement officials spend just 5 minutes dropping kids off here, whereas they'll spend up to an hour booking kids into detention. So what happens when kids walk through the door?
They receive a few things while they're here, first of which is some screening tools that are designed to tell us any major points that we should be aware of, like mental health issues, depression, substance abuse, trauma, family problems, all different kinds of things that are associated with delinquent behavior. We also do an assessment or a screening that's designed to tell us more about strengths or resiliency for kids. So what are the areas that we can use and build on that they have going in their lives that are positive? When we work with children in the center, it's incredibly important that our staff try to engage them personally. It's important that children and families leave here feeling like they were listened to, they were respected, that the process that they went through here wasn't like being booked into a jail, for instance. From there, knowing what the issues are and having spoken with the parents and the juvenile and kind of gotten to know what's going on, our officers try to prepare a case plan or an intervention plan that addresses the individual needs of that kid.
Sometimes we have kids who have been on runaway status, or maybe it's just they've had such an explosive situation at home, they really want to relax. We have showers available, they can do that. We provide food for them if they come in.
One thing ACES does not provide is permanent or even temporary shelter. Kids can only stay here for 23 hours until they need to be sent home. Or if home isn't the right spot for a kid, staff will find other options.
If there's a separate parent or a grandparent, aunt or uncle, a trusted friend that's an appropriate placement to release a child to, we can do that. We can also refer the family to seek shelter services, temporary shelter services, so that a kid can, again, not be housed here, not go to detention, but have an additional period of time before they return home.
And there are no kids here in the center right now. Is that unusual?
It's not unusual. It's hard to predict. You never know when law enforcement's going to come in or when a family is maybe in crisis and wants to stop by. Sometimes they call us, sometimes they don't, and so they could come in at any time.
ACES has been open for just over a year now. How has the first year gone, and how has the center evolved over that time?
I think we've seen a drastic change in some of the attitudes of the adults that work with children, and we've seen a change in the way that children and parents think about the service that they're receiving. So one of the primary measures that I'm concerned about is, what do folks think after they've received our service? How do they respond afterward? And the majority of families that we work with, the responses they give are positive. They feel like they were respected and listened to, that they received services from somebody who cared about what happened with their children. That's a primary outcome for me. That's incredibly important.
Vogler spent his entire career working with the juvenile court, and he's seen a big change in how the community treats kids in trouble.
When I started back in 1997 as a volunteer, we were pretty much at the height of the community's perception of juvenile crime and juvenile offenders. This was the time period where there was a lot of discussion in the media about the super predators and kids who don't have a conscience and gang activity. And in our community, we did have a lot of those things going on. We had a lot of shootings, we had a lot of gang-involved kids. What's happened since then has actually been not what we expected. And this is not a local trend, it's a nationwide trend, but crime is down, and crime has been down consistently since about 2003, 2004. Our referrals to juvenile court in Pima County are down by about half over that time period. So what that tells us is that we didn't need to be afraid of super predators, that things weren't just about to go out of control. And there's been a lot of research done in the field of justice and juvenile justice during that time period to inform what we do with our kids. What that research has told us is that locking kids in detention is not an effective intervention. It's told us that transferring kids to adult jurisdiction doesn't help, it doesn't change their behavior. In fact, recidivism is worse for those kids than the kids that we work with in juvenile court. So it's taught us a lot about what we do.
ACES is, of course, one manifestation of that change in how the system's treating kids. And Chris Vogler thinks it can serve as a good model for keeping adults out of jail as well.
One of the things that we've already seen is that since the Pima County Juvenile Court has been a very progressive court and has been working on justice reforms for a long time, going back to 2003, 2004, when we started working on detention alternatives and disproportionality in our system, the adult court system is now beginning to catch up. So right now in Pima County, there's a group working with a grant from the MacArthur Foundation to look at exactly what we're talking about. And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with that MacArthur Foundation grant in the adult system and what comes out of it and how the adult system changes. I think it'll look a little bit more like what we have.
Now we head to Oro Valley, where voters are being asked if they're willing to pay an extra property tax to develop a public park.
Proposition 454 will ask Oro Valley residents to authorize the sale of $17 million in bonds to pay for improvements at Naranja Park. The bonds would be repaid through a secondary property tax. The town estimates that the average homeowner with a house valued at $250,000 would pay $4.50 a month. Naranja is one of 3 public parks in Oro Valley, and it's pretty underdeveloped, even though the town has owned it for quite some time.
Naranja Park actually was purchased by a previous council over 20 years ago. It's about 20 years ago, and it remained undeveloped until about 2 years ago under my leadership, and the current council now decided to develop it. And we developed it by initially putting in some infrastructure and then 2 dog parks for large dogs and small dogs, and we put 2 fields in. Today, we've budgeted for 2 more fields, and so if you head to Naranja Park, you'll see the other 2 fields under construction.
Right now, construction's being paid by the town's general fund.
Our budgets are balanced through fiscal responsibility. So we're doing a pay-as-you-go, but we have an enormous amount of parents and young athletes who just don't have fields to play on. We have 3 state championship teams for Oro Valley Little League, and they do not play or practice in the town of Oro Valley.
Earlier this year, a group of parents came to the city council with a request.
They said, we appreciate the pay-as-you-go. We appreciate you, keeping the town fiscally responsible. However, we want to build a lot quicker than 10 to 15 years, which is what it would take. So they approached us, and they could not put the initiative on the ballot themselves. So the council decided to place the initiative on the ballot for them, and that's where our responsibility ends.
If the measure passes, it'll cover 4 baseball fields, 3 soccer fields, concession stands, restrooms, ramadas, parking lots, a playground, and other infrastructure.
My name is Jim Horn. I am the chairperson of ACTS, the tax. We are not supporting Proposition 454.
One reason for Horn's opposition is that it would be a deviation from the pay-as-you-go approach to developing the park.
You can see by the fields over there that we've got 2 more fields going in. In 2013, we had 2 fields. Now we're going to have something like 6 fields. And consequently, we feel that we should pay as you go. We should not have the property tax burden for our taxpayers of Oro Valley, which is almost $28 million with interest.
Horn says that by saying the bond is $17 million, the town's not being forthright about how much it will really cost taxpayers.
They think that we forgot about the interest. So the total bond with interest is going to be about $28 million. That $4.50 on average for a house valued at $250,000 is all inclusive of the interest and the principal.
I don't think the taxpayers realize that if the bond issue is approved and those estimates come in for the fields and they're under what the bond issue was, they can take those monies and use those elsewhere. And that's been a common problem with bond issues and a common problem or a common complaint of taxpayers. Not
so, says Mayor Hiremath.
If the amount comes in at $14 million, guess what? We only bond for $14 million. It sunsets after 20 years. What we don't use, we don't have the provision to reallocate it to other areas of our town government. We just basically prepay it early. So if their figures are right, which I hope they are, then they should be more supportive of it because that's all we're going to bond for.
Now, this isn't the first time that Oro Valley voters are being asked to greenlight a bond to develop Naranja Park. They voted down a bond package in 2008.
Keep in mind, the 2008 bond package, it had everything for everybody. So the price tag on that was very, very large. It was upwards of about $50 million. And so this one here, the bond is only to run the initiative for specifically ball fields.
My impression is that the voter sentiment remains the same. As I watch our blog and our Facebook page and the Nextdoor blog site, I'm generally getting a feeling that the people really do not want to pay, or the taxpayers do not really want to pay any additional tax.
Oh, it's real simple. Nobody likes to pay taxes and people want services. That's the way it works.
Bradford brings his dog Grady to Naranja Park a few times a week. So would he support Proposition 454?
It's fine with me. I'd love it if they did it with the roads too.
Jim Horn says the measure is just another example of the town's fiscal negligence. 2 years ago, Oro Valley purchased the El Conquistador Country Club and Golf Course, which has lost a lot of money since that acquisition.
We'd like to see the city sell the course and get back to financial responsibility.
The golf course is losing money, but it was a calculated projection. So it was always been a 5 or 6 year plan. 2 years ago when we first acquired it, we lost $850,000. This year it's a little bit over $500,000.
And despite that, he says the town's doing well financially.
Last year we ended as the town of War Valley $2 million in the black. And this includes the community center, which includes the golf losses.
Mayor Hiremath says one reason he thinks the bond package has a good chance to pass is because the demographics in Oro Valley are very different today than what they used to be.
From about 1974 to mid-2000s, it was roughly about 85% retired. So flash forward to 2005 to current, it's 75% not retired. That's a huge demographic shift within just a 10 or 12 year time span.
So what happens if the bond is rejected?
The beauty of it is that this is all really up to the voters of the town of Oro Valley. If enough of them voted up, then great, we proceed starting January because we'll have the money to do that. If they voted down, that's equally fine as well. We're just going to continue the pay-as-you-go approach. And so far, it's been very successful in getting dog parks and multi-purpose fields. It'll take a little bit longer, but that's our fallback to Plan B, and it's a pretty good fallback.
No one is saying that we shouldn't have good facilities for the kids. That's first and foremost. But we don't need to accelerate the purchase of fields on a $28 million bond issue.
We'll look at other measures on this November's ballot over the coming weeks. Now a story about conservation. There are two stretches along the Santa Cruz River that flow year-round, the upper Santa Cruz near Nogales and the lower north of Tucson. It's not melting snow or storm water that feeds the river. It's treated wastewater, which is revitalizing the ecosystem.
The stretch of the river that we're talking about today is the lower Santa Cruz.
The current flowing reach starts near Sweetwater Wetlands and goes to roughly Trico Road, which is a 23-mile stretch.
That stretch, like most of the Santa Cruz River, flows north. Treated wastewater has been pumped into the area since the 1970s. Until a few years ago, that water contained pollutants that were harmful to the ecosystem.
Wastewater is naturally full of nutrients and nitrogen and other things, but too much of a good thing it can be a problem. And ammonia is one form of nitrogen that is toxic for fish at high concentrations. And the nutrients also cause a problem with our river bottom. Water would normally filter down, but as you get a lot of organisms and algae building up that break down those nutrients, they kind of seal it off.
That seal is sometimes called a Schmutzdecke.
A sealing layer that was on the bed of the river and prevented infiltration.
That means the water flowing through here wasn't being absorbed to recharge groundwater levels. In other words, there were all sorts of environmental problems. In 2013, Pima County completed massive upgrades to the two wastewater plants that feed the stretch of the Santa Cruz. That massively reduced the amount of ammonia and other nutrients being released into the river. The Sonoran Institute and Pima County worked together to study the impact that's having on the environment.
What we see now is a flowing river that has clear water, there's fish in it, and it doesn't smell as much as before. Some would say it doesn't smell at all. We're seeing a more natural functioning river because the water is infiltrating into our groundwater.
There have also been positive results for fish life.
We started off having just one species of fish that was really only found at our furthest downstream stretch, and now since 2015 we've had 5 species with a new one found just last year. And they're all non-native, but just that they're there is really exciting because that means the water quality can support fish life.
The thing I'm always get excited about are the insects. Insects are kind of this basal aquatic life that the other things feed on, and as we've seen improved water quality, we've seen increased diversity. You know, we're seeing more mayflies. You're very likely to see some dragonflies down there. I always get excited about dragonflies. So, you know, this is really beginning to look like a real river. So, you know, of all the things that we kind of intuitively think about a river should have, insect community like dragonflies and fish, it smells good, it's fairly clear, those things are back.
There's been some good news from the upper stretch of the river in Santa Cruz County as well, and Claire says that bodes well for the river as a whole.
The upper Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County is just a little bit ahead of what we're seeing here in terms of the story, because the upper Santa Cruz is a stretch of the river that's fed by treated wastewater from Nogales, Sonora and Nogales, Arizona, and it had a significant upgrade with their facilities in 2009, and we finally had the Gila top minnow return in 2015 and 2016.
The endangered Gila top minnow is a little native fish that hadn't been seen in the river for many decades. The reemergence is one sign that native habitat is returning to a healthy state.
I'm really excited to see them. I hope to still see them in 2017. And they were found, no one put the fish back in the river. They were upstream in Mexico, presumably, and in tributaries, and they were just able to come down in floods. And so once the water quality was improved, they were able to survive. And so I'm still hoping that we'll have the perfect flood conditions, not too crazy of a flood, but just a low enough flow that'll connect these two stretches, and we'll get the Gila top minnow down here too.
Speaking of floods, flood protection is one of Evan's main concerns. And he says the county's trying to not be singular in its approach to managing floods or the river as a whole.
The loop trail is also a flood control infrastructure maintenance trail. So, I think we as, public entities, need to look at multi-benefit when we look at things. So, obviously, this has to provide flood safety, but it can also provide recreation. It can also provide for bicyclists. It can also provide bird habitat, and of course it can provide fish habitat.
The Sonoran Institute and Pima County will continue to study the river, and they both see a lot of potential.
For this stretch of the river, we want to continue reconnecting people to this stretch and helping people realize they have a flowing stretch of the river. And so we're going to continue reporting on conditions, but also building on that by we have a public survey and workshop effort coming up in October where we're trying to figure out where people go along the river, what they value.
I think there's potential for economic development. A lot of the other communities we can look at that have flowing water, have community amenities next to them. I think the future is really bright here.
The Sonoran Institute's conducting a survey about how community members use the Santa Cruz. It's open through Sunday. Find a link to it and information about upcoming community meetings on our website. There was fear when Major League Baseball spring training teams left Tucson that the Kino Sports Complex was doomed. You may remember it as Tucson Electric Park, its former name. We visited this week to find out how the center is doing today.
Well, it's taken a couple years to come back and have the community realize that there are opportunities for a myriad of different events out here. And so nowadays, if you can think of an event, we probably have a space for it.
And while things are going pretty well today, there was a time that management was worried that the site would be vacant.
When you have a Major League Baseball or Major League sports team of any kind, they're usually here for 6 or 8 months out of the year, and then they take a slight break. But when they are here, they're completely entrenched in a facility. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room for activities for the outside community, youth sports, anything that might occur. So there was that feeling like, okay, they left, now what are we going to do? We've, don't have that fan base for use of the facility. So it took probably a good 3 to 4 years to build that up, and it was very slow. And now it's kind of taken off the past couple of years.
Last year revenue here was about $1.3 million. Does that cover the entire cost of running the facility?
No, the facility is subsidized by the county budget and the general fund. So any revenue that's generated goes to offset that. And it's slowly picked up. We're hoping to be at least that much this year, if not a little bit more. We're shooting for about the 1.3, 1.4 mark again. We have very few available weekends for big events that generate a lot of revenue currently, because we've got a calendar that goes 2 to 3 years out. Hopefully with expansion of facilities, we'll be able to increase that revenue as time goes on.
The Kino Sports Complex was built initially and the cost was covered by a bond. What's the status of the bond?
The final payment on the bond will be in December of this year. So then the bond will be retired, and there will be no more annual payments on any money that was used to build this facility.
And in 2014, Pima County purchased a large lot of land just south of here. What's going on with that expansion?
Right now, the first phase of that expansion is progressing. We're looking at putting in 12 soccer fields, all lighted, all natural grass, so that we'll have a real first-class tournament complex for a number of different sports, whether it's flag football, whether it's soccer, field hockey, lacrosse. You need anywhere between 10 and 20 fields to attract regional, national events here. And so in the past, all of the local youth teams have had to go up north and play at their complexes. Hopefully when that is done in a couple years, they'll be able to stay here at home. We'll be able to have that economic impact that the Valley's been getting for so many years.
And the expansion was initially going to be paid for through another bond, which voters voted down in 2015.
Correct.
How will the county be paying for it?
Well, it's got the first phase, again, will be funded by what they call certificates of participation. Some of it will go from the debt payments that we don't have to make anymore. We'll subsidize to fund that first phase there, which is estimated to be at between $18 and $20 million.
Earlier this year, Pima County approached the Milwaukee Brewers to entice them back to Tucson for spring training.
Anytime that we get word that there may be a team, whether it's a major league team, whether it's a team from the Pacific Coast League or the Mexican League, the Korean teams, we'll reach out to them and say, hey, we have this facility here. It's major league quality. We've got this many fields and clubhouses and all the perks that go along with it. And then it's up to them to see if they want to, take a chance. We probably once or twice a year will get an inquiry and we'll send them the information packets, and we go back and forth a little bit, and some come to fruition, some don't.
And so it's still in the negotiation?
Still up in the air. We've not heard back from the Brewers. We do have Mexican teams coming in a couple of weeks for spring training, as well as Korean teams in February and March. So that aspect keeps going.
Could you talk a little bit about the economic impact of the facility on the wider sort of South Tucson area? How much of a footprint does it have in this area?
I think now that there's so much activity going on, the economic impact in the immediate surrounding area is starting to pay off. The bridges directly to the northwest with the movie theater and Dave & Buster's is definitely a place where after events people can go in between tournaments. This tournament that we're going to have this weekend, they'll play, they'll be off for a couple hours, they can go hang out at the local malls or one of the other attractions. Some events roll packages in with Visit Tucson, where they can play during the morning, in the afternoon they'll go out to Old Tucson or Colossal Cave. So there's a huge economic impact. Obviously, the more out-of-town teams that we can get to visit and play, the better, because then they stay in hotel rooms and rent cars, and all of that economic impact comes back to the city and the county.
That's our show. We leave you now with a story we did in 1988, when spring training was so big in Tucson that parts of the movie Major League were filmed here. Thanks so much for watching.
Movie making. It may look like fun, but really it's a lot of hard work, especially during the hot, muggy monsoon season days in Tucson. The movie is called Major League. It is produced by Chris Chesser, who has a very special reason for being excited about the film being made in Tucson.
The simple answer is that the picture is about the Cleveland Indians, Peggy, and therefore why not shoot the spring training portion of the picture where the Indians really train? The film people here are very cooperative, and also I'm from here. I was raised a couple blocks from the stadium, grew up watching the Indians, and as it turned out that didn't make any difference, but if there got to be some compelling reasons to not come to Tucson, I would have done my best to come here anyway.
The stars of the film are Charlie Sheen and Tom Berenger, both well known for their roles in the Oscar-winning Platoon. Also on hand was Dodger great Steve Yeager, who was working as a consultant on the film.
Because only a minor part of the movie Major League is going to be filmed in Tucson, the production is expected to pump only about $100,000 into the Tucson economy. That, of course, is only a ballpark figure.
Tom Hildebrand runs the city's film commission, which has the job of attracting film companies to Tucson.
Total budget, I'm told, on the film is approximately $10 million, but we're happy in this environment we're working in with the writer's strike and everything to have them here. It's great because we've been down this year from production.
Fans were on hand today, although as the heat and humidity went up, their numbers began to go down. Free drinks and hot dogs helped, as did the attraction of seeing stars.
Most of my memories are from spring training watching the Indians, and it seems sort of the same. Seeing all these people here reminds me of just a regular crowd for the Indians during spring training.